Bastrop, Texas is well known for its rich history, natural beauty, and an authentic vibe that you just can't find anywhere else. The city of Bastrop is proud to bring you Overheard at City Hall, a podcast aimed at bringing you, our community, inside the walls of City Hall to get to know the hardworking men and women of the city of Bastrop who wake up every day to serve you, our citizens. Join us as we discuss the many topics that on any given day may be overheard at City Hall.
Hey Bastrop City Manager Paul Hofmann, and thanks for tuning in to Overheard at City Hall, coming to you from the beautiful LCRA reading room at the Bastrop City Library. And today, this morning, I'm visiting with Trey Job. Trey is an assistant city manager for the city of Bastrop. Trey, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. I'm actually looking forward to this conversation. You know, I'm not sure I ever told you this, that when I first came to Bastrop, and this was last July, and I was still working in my prior city and was working towards the transition to coming here, and you and I had a couple of phone conversations, and you were giving me the rundown on what was going on in Bastrop and some of the history, and you were serving at the time as interim city manager.
Yes.
And I remember talking about you to the assistant city manager that worked for me in Bel Air, my prior city, and I guess I really overdid it. I said, man, I can't wait for you to meet this guy, Trey Job, and this is what he's been doing, and this is all the stuff that he's telling me about, and all the stuff going on in Bastrop, and oh my gosh, he just seems on top of everything, and I think I made that assistant city manager in Bel Air just a little bit jealous. He gave me a little bit of pushback, like, well, so go already. And I said, no, it's all good. But seriously, I do enjoy working with you a lot, and how well we've been able to work together, and the organizational structure we've been working through since I've been here. I think it works, and I really do appreciate all of that. So why don't we start there? Why don't you talk a little bit about the last few years here in Bastrop in particular, and up to the time when I got here, some of that real important planning work and really impressive planning work that the city of Bastrop went through that put us in the position we're in today.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for talking so good about me. I understand. Even though we had all those conversations, you still decided to take the job, so that's good.
Well, I was committed by that time.
Okay, you'd already signed something. Got it.
I did. Yeah.
Got it. So I appreciate it.
No regrets, but yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this last 18, 24, 36 months has been kind of a whirlwind.
Yeah.
There was a lot of code rewriting that happened. You know, we switched to a more form-based code over the entire city. We did have a new city manager on the way, filled in as interim. I actually came here just about 9 years ago as their director of public works. Never really expected to be the assistant city manager of community development or for community development, but
never anticipated likely being the planning director
or the interim city manager. That's right. So, but it all worked out. What I found was when I came here to Bastrop, they're really a family organization, and everybody wants to put in their work and get things done. And I knew I wanted to be a part of that, whether it was interim city manager, assistant city manager.
Right.
And I really think we're heading in the right positive way. And a lot of planning, like you said, has went into that. So we've got water plants, sewer plants that are being built. And we've started on those 5 or 6 years ago when we started talking about this stuff, which is why we're ready now to manage the development that's coming.
Well, that's all really well said, and I am maybe going to ask you just to back up a little bit. Sure. The current comprehensive plan was developed in 2016.
It was.
In fact, a little over 5 years ago, and it's now time for us to be re-reviewing elements of that comprehensive plan, and of course we're taking steps to do that, and have had those conversations with the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. And I happily took this job for a lot of reasons. and chief among those reasons is just being impressed with, not so impressed with the document itself, the existing comprehensive plan document, which does a good job of laying out the physical vision of the community, but the fact that it doesn't just sit on a shelf, and that this city council and the staff, really with your leadership, make sure that it's a living, breathing document and that we're implementing it.
Yeah, I agree.
Doesn't happen everywhere.
No, it doesn't. There's a lot of places. I've worked a few before here.
Right.
And that's exactly right. It's just a book on the shelf. But we'll say our current mayor was the chair of the P&Z
right.
when that was being written, and she was a big part of that.
No doubt.
So the community
and a real passion for planning and making sure we're held accountable to all those principles that laid out in that plan.
And a lot of the community that was really interested in that comprehensive plan have taken other positions on boards or whatnot to really see that implementation, and that's always helpful to staff when the whole community has a shared vision. And that's what I think is actually unique about Bastrop, is they know who they want to be when they grow up. Yeah, and that's rare.
It is, and you articulate that often and very well, and I appreciate that too. So you made reference to the code rewrite, and cities go through code rewrites pretty often. I've been through a little bit of that in other places, but even that here in Bastrop was taken to a bit of a different level, and it does all stem from that 2016 comprehensive plan. But we didn't just rewrite the code, we kind of turned things on its ear with the whole adoption of a form-based zoning code approach, which is, I mean, it's not unheard of. There are other communities that have done it, but that's pretty unique too. So, and here's a public works guy being asked to help implement all of that, and which I think is pretty cool because we were just talking with Curtis Hancock about just how foundational public works stuff is to everything, right? And if you don't have that, if you're not managing the city's physical plant well, then none of this other stuff really matters. If you're not planning it, if you're not managing it well, if you're not thinking about the future. And so it makes perfect sense for a public works guy to be planning director and assistant city manager for community development.
Well, and I had this conversation with actually our consultant when we were writing it.
Yeah.
And he said public works is going to be the key to this type of code. And maybe that is why it's easy for me to speak to it.
Right.
It is really well written and to be less regulatory, right? Let you do more with your property. That's why we don't regulate use. So, we only regulate by nuisance. So you can do just about anything you want. It's super flexible. Sometimes it can be a little frustrating when you're determining how you want to go because it doesn't spell everything out for you. But overall, the flexibility is what makes it awesome. But it's also what makes it difficult. Yeah,
that's I think well said. And since I've been here, I've been in a few conversations with property owners and potential developers, and who are trying to figure this out too, right? It's new to them as well, and I sense some amount of frustration where they say, "Well, just tell me what it is I can do here,"
right? And
they're not automatically initially seeing that built-in flexibility that you're describing. They, in essence, get to develop their own zoning.
If you're in an employment center, absolutely, yes.
Right.
Yep.
For that kind of development. Which is in a way a little mind-blowing to old guys like me who've been used to the Euclidean zoning approach in every place that we've been in. So highlight what was the city trying to accomplish, big picture, with the adoption of those new codes and the form-based zoning.
And I want to clarify, because since we're old city guys, have been doing this for 20 plus years, we say codes a lot, and there are several different codes.
Oh, that's a good point.
There are codes of ordinances, that the police enforce, that the code enforcement people do, that the building official enforces.
Yep.
There's also building codes, right, which are completely different. But more specifically, what we worked on was the zoning code, which is the Bastrop building blocks code,
right?
Which is truly that form base that we've been talking about. And at high level, what I think everybody was trying to accomplish was they want to trap that authentic Bastrop feel. And when we say authentic Bastrop, I really think it just means a feel of authenticity anywhere. There's a lot of Texas towns that are built similarly, but when you get here, it feels authentic because it reminds you of where you came from or where you were born in this small town in Texas. But it always gives you a unique and authentic feel. So what we wanted to do is recreate that. And we actually studied our own DNA, if you will, in that's where we started. And those building blocks where Bastrop started in the 1837, right? We went down and we measured the blocks, we measured the lengths of the blocks, we looked at the glazing on the buildings, we looked at the height of the buildings, and we said, you know what, this worked for 187 years, almost 188 years now. Let's try to do this everywhere, and that's where we started.
Literally
tried
to, and we talked about the importance of public works and this physical layout.
Yes.
The physical, the code talks about the public realm, right?
Yes.
We're trying to repeat that.
That's right.
As we develop and as we grow, because it works.
It works.
And it's sustainable.
It is sustainable. It actually generates a higher value per acre in that area, which allows you to maintain the roads better, take care of all of the infrastructure we've been talking about in the public works, the water lines, the sewer lines,
right,
the drainage.
Right.
It actually yields a higher amount to maintain that so you can stabilize the tax base, which is the real goal.
And it does honestly put a burden on that developer.
It does.
For making sure the road network is put in place and that it works, and that the cost of that isn't borne on the folks who are already living here and are paying taxes.
That's correct. Yeah, we would like development to pay for itself. That is a clear policy directive. And whatever is built here, we want it to be fiscally sustainable so that it can maintain the infrastructure that was built.
And then there's the multimodal component of that too. Another significant priority of the Bastrop City Council that ties back to that 2016 comprehensive plan.
There is, and we actually, with these updates, laid in a 720 grid, which is one farm lot, right from our original DNA. And we did that all the way into the 1 mile ETJ because it's going to be our front door as people come in and enter and exit, and we want it to be nice. So it was important to us, even if you're not in the city limits, we control this large ETJ. We still want it to develop in a way that's responsible because there's a possibility of it being in the city limits.
And not as dependent on automobiles for getting around.
Yes, to get me back to multimodal, you're absolutely right. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
I got excited talking about transportation. But there's multiple modes of transportation. Again, back to the DNA, all of our streets are 55 and a half feet, right? And that works out to be 3 Vera, which is roughly a Mexican yard, which was laid out when the original town track was done. And it's built just wide enough to take care of people that were walking, horses. 3 Vera just happens to be wide enough for one wagon wheel to turn 3 times to turn around in the middle of the street.
Right.
So we thought if it was good enough for cars and it was good enough for people and it was good enough for horses, we should really expand on that and really build something that any type of transportation could do. Could be taken care of in our street network, right? Whether it be autonomous vehicles later on, whatever.
Yeah.
And we stuck with that.
So that's all really interesting stuff. You mentioned earlier the 1 mile ETJ, and not everyone who's watching may completely understand what that's all about. ETJ stands for extraterritorial jurisdiction, and there's a statutory that is granted by state law for home rule cities, not just cities in Texas, that depending on the population size, and for a city the size of Bastrop, it's 1 mile. You extend from the existing city limits 1 mile of jurisdiction that's outside of the city limits, but essentially gives us subdivision authority.
That's correct.
And another priority of the city council is quality growth, and so that gives us some ability to assure quality growth in the extraterritorial jurisdiction. And to kind of connect to that, I'm going to ask you to speak about this, is how we manage quality growth through the provision of utility services.
Sure.
And this does get awfully complicated. There's the Bastrop city limits. That means certain things as it regards our governmental authorities and responsibilities. There's the 1 mile ETJ. There's also broader than that, a voluntary ETJ, where we have subdivision authority
Correct.
as well, and as we negotiated that with Bastrop County. But then there's also the areas that we're certified to provide water and wastewater services, and that's key to managing growth too.
It is. Our city limits are just a bit smaller than our water CCN.
Right.
And the CCN is a certificate of convenience and necessity.
Right.
Essentially, it's the service area where we're allowed to provide you water service.
Right.
Our wastewater.
Gives us first dibs, if you will.
Correct.
To
And
be
our-
your water provider.
That's correct. And our wastewater area, service area, is actually 3 times larger than the city limits.
It's giant.
It's gigantic. And,
Yeah.
and having the only under construction regional provider wastewater system, I hope, really will help us manage growth in that entire area. Because if you want utilities from us, we've been asked by our city council and tasked with our policymakers to make sure that the growth is well managed and it's done right. So when you connect, there are certain rules that come with that. To make sure that you're a good neighbor to everybody in the ETJ, you're a good neighbor to our citizens, and that it's just a better quality level of development. And that's kind of how we control that because utilities are pretty important, right? Everybody needs to flush the toilet and take a shower from time to time, so gotta have that stuff.
And the stuff you're talking about isn't just theoretical stuff. This is stuff that's happening in the here and now. And I don't want us to talk too much about specific development negotiations that we're having right now. But I do want you to talk a little bit about what it is we're trying to accomplish and how we try to accomplish that when a property owner or developer comes to us and says, hey, here's what I'd like to do, especially in the ETJ. And we have a tool that's available to us by policy and by state law. We can negotiate a development agreement.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes what brings us to the table together is they need utility service,
yes.
Water and or wastewater, and that gives us something to talk about right there. And we may not have the same kind of zoning authorities in the ETJ,
Correct.
but we can negotiate what that development looks like as a condition of us providing services.
That's right, and it's important that we have that tool.
Yep.
It's specific to cities,
Right.
so we can't do that in the county. What I think is important about that is, again, like we're going to provide the utilities. That does give us some say on how you develop, and it allows for that better connectivity, which again brings us back to that multimodal transportation,
Right.
which is super important. For example,
So that 720-foot grid
Grid.
system, okay, we'll want you, Mr. Developer, to follow that grid.
this is important to us.
This
That's
is really important to us. Right.
If you've ever been on Highway 71 on any holiday weekend, you understand why more roads are pretty important so you can still get to your house.
Yeah.
And we're working on it.
We have some legitimate traffic issues here in
We do.
little old Bastrop, and
do.
it's important that we manage growth accordingly, no doubt.
To mitigate that as much as possible, I would agree.
Right.
We without being specific about any type of or any specific development, we are working on 3 or 4 development agreements at the moment.
That cover over 1,000 acres. This is a big deal.
Well over 1,000 acres, yes.
This is a big, important deal that has implication for the next several decades.
It does.
And so that's a good segue into this wastewater plant that is under construction now. That is designed to serve a much larger area than just the current city of Bastrop. And that's largely an underserved area now. And so there's a financial planning challenge here. We're about to ask council to issue, I think, like $36 million in debt.
Yep.
That's not all for the wastewater plant, but
Right.
most of it is for the wastewater plant. And we have, 6,000 utility customers
Give or take, yes.
who are responsible for providing the funding through their rates to service that debt. The good news is that debt will be spread out over 30 years, and we employ this idea called generational equity.
Yes.
We want future users of that wastewater facility, future ratepayers, to help bear that burden. And so we purposefully spread that cost burden out over a few decades, anticipating that the people who will move here over the next several years have a responsibility to help pay for it and try to spread all that out. And then there's the pretty aggressive approach the city takes to impact fees.
There is. Those impact fees are important.
Yeah.
Because you can't recover all of the debt for that.
You cannot.
Which is a good reason to talk about this, I suppose. The current wastewater plant that we have, which is actually 2 plants, about 1.4 million gallons a day, we bought for $1
from the city of
80s,
Austin.
right?
Yeah. Like 40 years ago.
40 years ago.
That's quite a return on that investment.
It's a very good return. That's a compliment to Curtis and his team and the way they operate and run their business.
Duct tape and baling wire.
But all of the gooey is out of that system. So it is, all the bubble gum is chewed up, the flavors,
Right.
it's time to get rid of it. That is one component.
And we're at about 85% capacity with that current plant. And
yeah.
So TCEQ starts to raise their eyebrows about that point.
You have to be under construction by 95%.
And we are.
We have beat that.
Good news,
That's right.
yes.
But that was one of the main drivers for this plant. We did not just build it for growth.
Right.
There was a need for a new plant for the existing customers.
Yeah.
But we planned ahead and planned for the growth as well. So that site is large enough for 4 actual 2 million gallon a day plants, which will serve possibly 70,000 homes or some kind of variation of that.
Puts us in such a good position for the future.
Very
I
good
would say an enviable position moving ahead. So,
But the good news about that is the more customers, the more evenly spread out it is. That gets us back to the people that are moving in are paying for it, and the impact fee and why.
and the plant is scalable. I mean,
And the plant
maybe
is
you said
scalable.
that we'll phase that in. We're not building the ultimate capacity first rattle out of the bag.
That's correct.
It's one way we're managing the cost.
That's right. But we
Right.
did want to think that far ahead,
Right.
and make sure that it was big enough for full build out. And then we also wanted to make sure that we were a good neighbor, so we bought a little extra property for tree buffers
Yeah,
and
right.
things of that nature to mitigate noise from the pumps, to mitigate. We're actually going to plant some trees, some nice landscaping, and the building. If you ever get to see a rendering of it,
Yeah.
looks a lot like
I think-
an old farmhouse.
I
And
think
that's-
we have a rendering of it on the city's website. Yeah.
and that is the plan, to make it fit into the fabric of the neighborhood, so
Right.
you don't feel like you live next door to a wastewater treatment plant.
Yeah.
So
See it or smell it.
that's where, yes.
That's the idea.
It's also going to completely be covered
Right.
to mitigate odor.
No, it's state of the art.
Yeah,
It's really something.
It was really thought out.
Yeah. Well, congratulations, Trey, on all of that great work. It's not like you can sit back on and rest on your laurels. There's a lot going on, and we're all super busy. But it really is a pleasure to work with you and the entire team. This city organization has been through a lot these last few years, and I do give you a lot of credit for keeping the wheels on the wagon during all that time and establishing the very positive and responsive public service kind of culture that exists in the city. What I appreciate about you and just about everybody else in the staff team is that our agenda is the city council's priorities, and
Yes.
there's none of that giant ego stuff going on with any member of the staff team.
I would agree.
And thank you.
Yeah,
And
I agree. I think they do it because they love it.
Yeah, I was just talking with Curtis earlier,
Yeah.
a separate podcast, who talked about growing up here and loving it here. Yeah.
He truly cares about this town.
No doubt,
Yeah.
no doubt. And so do you, and really do appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Glad to do it.
Thank you.